Medicine and Science. I'm Rosemary Tyrrell. I'm the Director of the Office of Faculty Development for the UCR School of Medicine, and I want to thank you so very much for joining us today for this special event. And I also want to thank Linda Reinman and the staff of the Office of Strategic Initiatives for partnering with us on this event. And I also would be remiss if I didn't thank my own staff of the Office of Faculty Development for all the work that they did that went into making this event a success. And I also want to give a very special thank you to Vice Chancellor Deborah Dees for supporting this Women in Medicine and Science event for the 6th year in a row. And without her support, this event would not be possible. So our first item today is the Allyship Panel, which is being moderated by Dr. Monica Carson, who is the chair of the Division of Biomedical Sciences. So without further ado, I'm going to ask the panelists to come up and sit down at this table, and I'm going to turn the mic over to Dr. Carson.
Thank you very much for organizing this. Thank all of you for being here today. And Dr. Tyrrell had asked me to start with some opening remarks, and I'll start with those as while we're getting seated right now. And as Ross is just showing me, I'm only 5 foot, 60 inches, and we needed to take that off. So, Allyship in demo. Okay, so what are we here for? We're here for a panel, and this panel is an allyship panel. And I have to say, I grew up, I know a bit activism. Came up from a family who did a lot of activism. I knew what that was. We'd hear things about sponsorship and very much advocacy and sponsorship to get entry into what were spaces that were inappropriately closed, the spaces where creation was going on, spaces where decisions were being made. So I knew about that. But as I come, going over things, where's these new words coming from? I knew about not being seen, not being heard. We all know and have the experience, even the ones who are very easy and very welcome in certain spaces. I think we all have had at least one of these experiences. And I always, my family, we always make fun of this one ad that we always knew that was on about 10 years ago. It was a FedEx ad. And surprisingly, it was 2 white males here, but one said something else. We need to do this, we need to package, and we need to do that. And then the person right next to stood up and said, we need to package, we need to do that. And everybody goes, yeah, that was the idea. And we always talk about that. Why was that person heard? And why was the first person who said literally in this ad the identical words not heard? So I knew about those kinds of things. That seemed to be about access. But again, what's allyship? What are we talking about here? And in putting this panel together, we had some pre-discussions about definitions. But we also had a discussion about getting trapped by definitions. We can argue about words forever. But I'm a research scientist. I'm somebody who works on the brain and how the blood gets along together or don't most of their lives and how that causes diseases. Theory gets you so far, but it's what's actually happening. So that's what we want to do in this panel is, yes, we'll use words, we'll define things, but we're really, as I say, being operationalists, experimentalists. And when we want to think about what we're going to do here, I think when we talked with some of the folks, and I talked, what do they want to get out of this? I heard words about, we want to be transformational in our thoughts. We want to help people get out of the traps they may have had from definitions. We want to help people when they're thinking, God, this is a big problem. What do I do? I'm the one that's experiencing the problem, or I'm the one who may be causing the problem. How do I do that? So we want to be transformational. We want to have the outcome of empowering people to consider. Okay, it's not even empowering to do it first, but empowering to consider. To see it's not one size fits all. There's a large menu of options of what can do that have different effectiveness, but sometimes it's just a matter of taste, of what you personally want to do, when. So these are some of the things that we want to explore while we're talking about here. And so the other thing we have to think about this is there's no winners or losers. We should do this with kindness and respect. And when we go through this, I will again say this thing. When we do this, we also have to confront the idea of privilege. I have many aspects of privilege, the very obvious of white privilege. I also have in academia the best and highest level of privilege. I'm a tenured full professor. And tenure is the right and is the privilege to hopefully say what needs to be said and with minimal consequences, but you're the one who's supposed to say it. So in that, how do I figure out what allyship is? What's my role in this? And I think I'm going to learn so much from everybody here about what their needs are, what their opportunities are, what's their strategies, what's worked, what hasn't. So we're going to just open this up as a huge discussion. We have some prepared questions. We're going to go through our questions that we have for about 30 minutes. We'll see how that conversation goes. And then we're going to open this up to everybody else and see what questions you may have. And the first thing we're going to do is also have everybody introduce themselves. And one of the things I asked everybody here, was it okay if we just had ourselves on a first name basis? First, I asked that because I don't like to take away people's accolades because you often need them. But I'm going to be very frank because I am everybody who knows me here, we're going to talk about things as they are. I look at this as a panel of women, and I noticed that the honorifics, the doctors, were associated with some of the men. This would be, I felt, inappropriate for us, that we want to be in a friendly group, and we should all be talking with others as a first name. So I asked permission on that. So that's my example of just starting here, of trying just to set a playing field for us to have a discussion. So with that, I'm going to start at one end and then come close to myself. So we're going to start with Paul and ask him to spend a few minutes introducing himself, and then we're just going to automatically go down one to next.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Carson. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Paul Hackman. I am the Compliance and Privacy Officer here for the School of Medicine and UCR Health, and I've been here for 7.5 years. Prior to coming to UCR, I worked in hospitals. I started in healthcare back in the 1980s, working at the bedside as a nursing assistant in nursing homes, and worked in various jobs in healthcare. I've been very fortunate throughout my career development because I myself have been supported by many strong female supervisors, bosses, coworkers, colleagues, and have enjoyed a great deal of collegiality with female colleagues. So I consider myself to be an ally. As I was driving over here this afternoon from the office, it occurred to me I'm actually the only male in my department out of 6. So I do take some pride in that. We have allyship is something that's very real to me. It's a collaborative mindset that I have because I have to really understand other people's needs, other people's interests, other people's abilities, and to tailor that in ways that I can work with them to accomplish goals. So it's something that's very real to me. Advocacy is very important to me as well. Being able to give a voice to people who sometimes don't always have that, to give a leg up to people, to assist with opportunities, finding active ways to help promote others. So those things are very real to me, and I'm very happy to be included on the panel today.
Hi, everyone. My name is Zigzada Wright. I'm a second-year medical student here at UCR. I graduated from Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, California, with a degree in biochemistry. And I'm very honored to be here today on this panel with everyone here. Feeling a little nervous because I'm, I guess, the one with the least title. But I'm very honored to be here. I'm glad I had the opportunity to be a part of a panel that talks about women and women's empowerment, essentially, as well as allyship and advocacy. I think it's really important for there to be advocates for women in medicine, being that women are not the, I would say, overarching population within medicine, but also having allyship as well, having people that are going to stand in your corner, that are going to advocate for you, to advocate for women advancement in medicine is something that I find really important, which is why I wanted to be a part of this panel as well. And I'm grateful to be here.
Hi, everybody. I'm Pablo Ho. I'm the Interim Senior Associate Dean for Medical Education, and I'm actually also very happy to be here. I've been here at UCR for about 1.5 years now, but I've been in academic medicine since 1997. And I have to say, I think my allyship and advocacy was early on. It's just from my personal upbringing here in Southern California. I was in a single parent home for most of that time. So, you know, watching my mom and her travails and career and the starts and the stops and everything. So you just saw it as a kid. So it starts early, even before we had words like allyship. So it's imprinted in me, and I think it's part of who I am. And in academic medicine, there are lots of opportunities and lots of hurdles that you have to cross. And for me, I think where it comes from also is my own intersectionality. I'm a mutt. I belong to so many groups, and the challenges that I've seen, not just for myself and for my colleagues, but also even our patients and the communities in terms of what they have to go through, and that it's still important. I mean, the role of, particularly for physicians, has eroded over time. It's not the same level of prestige, but it is still very powerful, and you have to use your voice to speak for those sometimes that don't have a voice, or to make sure that you put them, or give them a place at the table. So it's very, very important. So that's all I'll say for now, because I know I'll have lots of good questions coming up.
Well, I'm Carlos Cortes. I'm a retired UCR history professor. Took early retirement in 1994. Went out on my own as an independent diversity consultant and lecturer, which I have been now for 28 years. And 2 years ago, School of Medicine asked me if I would join them to help launch and design their new health equity, social justice, and anti-racism curricular thread. And I've been working with Dr. Adjo Osei, a pediatrician, since then. And so when I learned about this panel, and I was delighted to come here like all, I'm just thinking of Pablo saying he got into academic medicine in 1997. I retired in 94. So I'm still shuddering with that. I did 3 things to get ready for this. First, I read a few of some biographies of women in medicine, and I'll share some of that as I go along. Second, I read some quotations by women, not all in medicine, and I ran across a quotation by novelist Jennifer Egan, who said the following: "Knowing everything is too much like knowing nothing. Without a story, it's all information." And so I decided then, as the third thing I would do, is actually talk to real breathing women about the issue of allyship. And as it turns out, Paul was mentioning, almost all of the organizations I work with in the diversity area are either run by women or dominated numerically by women. And so I had lots of people I work with and work under and collaborate with. And I asked them all a simple question. When you think of allyship, what are things you like from male allies? And what are some things you don't like from male allies? And I got lots of really interesting answers, which I'll share with you today as we move through the panel discussion. So thank you very much, and really delighted to be here.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. I am delighted to be here. My name is Patty Walker. I am the LACE program coordinator here at School of Medicine. I've been here for 3 years. Given my current position, I have the grand opportunity to give back and help other women and individuals achieve their goals, listen, and provide valuable feedback and advocate for them. Previously, I dealt with the challenges entering in the workforce where mostly men held leadership roles. I have met wonderful and have met and worked with wonderful and amazing women and male colleagues who have mentored me throughout my career and during my master's program while working full time. This was very impactful to me and taught me the importance of helping and advocating for others. Thank you.
Thank you very much for those wonderful statements. I think it really says the range and the power of what we have here. And I'm going to start off with asking a question that really comes from my own puzzlement and my own development about allyship. Much of my life, I've obviously been benefited by allies. I did not recognize that they were doing that. And I've been, unlike what I just heard Carla saying, most of the fields I've been in are male dominated. I go to my science conferences. There's so many times I've been the only male there, or the only female there. There's all the men. It's really interesting when you're the pregnant female there. There's when we are here even on campus, the majority of our faculty are male majority. We have a variety of other situations where we have male-dominated situations. We are in a school that's wonderful. We have our senior leadership being led by VC Dean Dees. But this is the concept. Where have we been benefited by allies is important to think about so we know how to be allies and also how we ask for allyship. And so these are some concepts that we're going to want to explore in some of our discussions. And so one of the things that I want to start off discussing, and I'm going to start off throwing this first one to Zigzada, and whether you want to answer this with questions you think that need to be addressed, or you want to actually say something about it, either is good, just to get this thing started. So when we're thinking about allyship, we don't even know what the definition is, so don't worry about that. But in your words, how can somebody be an authentic ally and promote allyship, not only in the workforce, but also in your education and your career progression? That's being both education and career. So why don't we start off with you?
Thank you, Dr. Carson. I would say someone could be an ally to me or my educational endeavors. I would say by either through mentorship or through support. I have found through my journey to medicine now that my mentors just along the way that I didn't realize were really mentoring me really changed the trajectory of me even going into medicine. So even when I was an undergrad, I had a mentor that I didn't even know was a mentor at the time. Her name is Dr. Mitchell, and she was a biochemistry professor. And I remember telling her how I was really struggling in biochemistry and I wasn't sure if, I could still go into medicine and, really dealing with the difficulties of that. And then additionally being one of maybe 2 Black individuals within my biochemistry class. And within the science college, I believe I was one of 6. And just kind of feeling a little bit ostracized and kind of alone in my journey. She still continued to support me and offer tutoring and just words of encouragement for me to continue on my journey. And I feel like that really pushed me to continue on my journey as well as graduate on time. And then after I graduated, I had another mentor. Her name is Dr. Sanaa Lagans. And she works in family medicine in San Bernardino currently. And I had the opportunity to work with her for 3 years as a medical scribe and just kind of getting the chance to kind of see how she was as a physician, but also the way in which she conducted herself was something I tried to really model myself after. And kind of just having her as a mentor and someone that I would say not only encouraged me, but also challenged me in the way I was in patient visits with her, as well as holding me accountable during interview season. Just kind of challenged me with different questions and just kind of making sure I was very prepared for the journey I was going to embark on. I feel like was something that has really helped me, and I think that it can also help a lot of women, having other women in their corner that are advocating for them as well as supporting them on their journey in whatever occupation that they want to go into.
I was trying to turn it off so I didn't make accidental sounds in between. So that's wonderful. I think that takes a whole range, and it does also amplify the message. We don't always recognize our allies when they were there, and as we go forward. So on that thought, I think, would we like to hear from some other folks on that? Pablo, you've had, you said you belong to every group, so let's have you represent a lot of groups here.
Okay, so I've actually had the exact same experience, and again, I keep saying there wasn't words or concepts for these things, but even in undergrad and even before that, you know, I did have allies. We didn't have a name for these. I just thought they liked me, right? It's an accident, but they were all doing different things, and I mean, everything from my Latin teacher in high school to the pathology person, the head of the lab, who said to me, "Hey, why don't you come, you know, do your work study with me, and I'll introduce you to people at the hospital," which is what like got my foot in the door with medicine, and they're just stories that like in my head. Oh, I remember when she connected me with the chair of a department who told me, "You're never going to get into medical school with these grades." It was actually the best thing that ever happened because it got me into gear. Like, hey, I really got to get my act together. This isn't just a place to kind of hang out. But in medical school, in residency, there were folks along the way that did take an interest and step up to the plate. And then even in academic medicine, I did have wonderful people, and again, a different collage of stories. But what I'm really getting at is, now that we have these concepts here, I actually now have words and I understand what they actually did, whether it was intentional or not. But that's the difference. You can now take this, or I can take this, and now be intentional in terms of paying it forward. Because I didn't understand, oh, what's the difference between, and this is important, what's the difference between mentorship, coaching, and sponsorship? And those things are not necessarily all the same thing. And sometimes you get those things all in one person. Sometimes you do not. You go to different people, you gravitate to different people, and that it's okay to go and ask for these things too, right? Because I didn't ask, I just got lucky. Somebody came and took an interest in, but I didn't know that I could go and actually ask somebody to sponsor me for things. So I do that now intentionally with folks. In terms of people that I think might benefit for something, I just kind of put it through. Sometimes actually the conversations I have now with a lot of the junior faculty and with the students are actually the opposite, about things they should not do. Like, there are career opportunities and they're trying to decide whether they should go down path A or path B, and we talk it out, and sometimes the best decision is to not do it, right? Because there's other contexts or other things, or you're gonna overload your plate with too many things. Excel first. These are all the things along the way. And that's actually really important to have those sort of discussions. So again, these are all different. And later on, I think you may be asking us about some real tangible examples of when we pull these things out when we're talking with people. So I'll leave it then because I want everybody else to speak too.
So why don't we keep moving along? Patty, would you like to say something, especially when we're talking about this whole intentionality and authenticity?
Well, I have something a little bit brief too with that. You know, Dr. Ho and Zigzada had mentioned about their past experiences, and I have something similar too when I worked at a former medical school, Western University of Health Sciences. And even now, I've noticed that listening is so essential, especially with collaboration. And I am grateful that right now that we have the opportunity, we have these committees where it's not just faculty on faculty, it's faculty listening to staff, what we have to say, or what are the challenges and roadblocks that we can definitely bring conclusion and bridge the gap. And so it's recognizing and providing equality. And it's important to incorporate inclusion and create a workspace where everyone feels welcome and heard.
I think that's really takes us in a really good direction. I'm going to ask Carlos to maybe take this on and explore this a little bit more. Is in that same light, rather than focusing on definitions of what allyship, but really getting jumping in, when we're thinking of an ally, and we have mentors, we have coaches, what is it that we need to be done? So we're really looking at what is making somebody an authentic ally that is not being met somewhere else.
Yeah, well, thank you. Well, this takes me back to sort of the stories that I got from women, from professional women preparing for this panel. And three things they said, and I won't say they all surprised me, but in combination, they put a different direction on the way I thought about allyship. First thing they all said, the very first thing out of the box was they want to be heard. They want to have their stories heard, but more than heard, actually listened to. And to get feedback that people are actually listening to the stories they have to say about their lives, their professional journeys, the obstacles they encounter, and not be dismissed by people asserting data to prove that what they're saying is not correct. That's what they're running into, is that an ally is someone who can listen without judging the accuracy of what's being said, but to allow that to be, that story to be an authentic expression of a human being's experience. And then from that they went and they said, we want partners to collaborate, not individual problem solvers. That too often, when they express something and someone who wants to be a mentor or an ally or an advocate suddenly runs with it as the problem solver, when in fact what they want is a collaboration in getting things done. So it's co-equals. And by the way, I have to mention, some of them were a little negative about the idea of mentorship. Not that they were opposed to mentorship, but they had reservations about vertical mentorship, in which the person sort of sets themselves up as a paragon. Here's the path you must follow, as opposed to someone who would collaborate with them in conversations as to what paths you can lead. And the third is removing obstacles. They said, working collaboratively to remove and identify obstacles that allows them to fulfill the capacities they have. So it was that combination of those three things that really struck at me. And I came up with 5 words. I said, okay, here's how I'm going to sort of rethink allyship. Listen intently, collaborate, remove obstacles. Now that isn't the whole story, but it's enough to get me going in thinking about how I can be a better ally as time goes forward.
These are a lot of concepts that we're bringing forth about listening, hearing, making space, amplifying. Also identifying these issues between mentorship, coaching, allyship. What actually do we need when we see we need an ally? So when we're thinking about that, again, staying on the same concept of authentic allyship, and just trying to understand what we need to get from that, what do we need to deliver from that. How important is it to really identify people as allyships, and what would be the characteristics that you're going to use to identify them as that? And I'm going to do a shout out to somebody on the panel, Zigzada. She doesn't understand that she has been an outstanding ally to me as a student in our teaching experiences. We have frequently a situation where there'll be a majority men teachers. She's very good about positionality, pivoting, and listening. She's very good about amplifying things, about making sure to get a question. I've really noticed this about her, and this is why I was very excited to see you on this. So with that, I don't know if anybody wants to touch this question, but who would like to sort of think about how important it is to identify people as allies, since I think a lot of us are saying we didn't realize we had benefited from allyship. We didn't realize who was there, and sometimes we're not sure if they've been mentors or allies. Anybody would like to start with that? Maybe I'll start with Pablo. It's not Pablo. I'm looking right at Paul, and I can't do P words. Paul.
Thank you, Dr. Carson. I think that it is critically important, I think, for myself to have allies. I can't do my job. I can't function successfully without having allies. And I think that hopefully I am an ally to other people to help them accomplish their goals. To me, a big concept is building trust with others. And a lot of that has to do with listening to people, which has been said, really giving people opportunities and lending them that personal touch, your time, really showing true concern for their opinion, thinking about that, talking things through. And when you have that level of trust, you can have very open dialogues because you're not always going to agree with your allies, right? Or they may not agree with you, but you have that trust and communication where you can have those types of robust agreements and disagreements. I'll think of a hospital CEO that I worked for once, and she was quite a dynamo. She's long since retired, but she was very no nonsense. And I went to her, I was younger in my career back then, and I went to her complaining about something. And she looked at me and she said, "Why don't you put your big boy pants on and deal with it?" And I thought about that, and I thought, why don't I? But, and from that point forward, I just, had like this great working relationship with her because she kind of let me know from the beginning, I'm not going to have you bringing your problems to me. We're going to work, but you're going to, figure your own stuff out. So I think, with individuals, it is very important. It's, to me, critically important to build trust with others where they feel comfortable that they can come to you and have a safe place to discuss things. It might be issues in their life. They might have family issues that they need, accommodations with work. Who knows what it is? But unless you get to know people on a personal level, understand what their needs are, understand what they're coming from, you can't build that trust. And it doesn't happen overnight. So I think you have to be in it for the long term. I always tell people, play the long game. Your career is here, for many years, and you want to build those relationships to be sustainable over many decades.
Go ahead.
Yeah, something Paul said was really good about trust. And I want to share an anecdote, which I wasn't even planning on talking about today, that happened here at UCR. It was an event sort of like this. And afterwards, a young man came up to me and said, "Could we have lunch? I'd like to chat with you." And we went out and we had lunch. At which point she said, notice it was a young man to me. She said, "I'm transgender, but my identity is male. When I got the job, I'm keeping it." And I said, "Why did you pick me out to talk to?" And she said, you just sounded like somebody I could trust. And that has bothered me up until today, because I don't know how to bottle trust, Paul. How do you live a life presenting yourself as someone who's trustworthy and at the same time act in a way that fulfills that trust, that it isn't just phony? By the way, the story has an happy ending. She has now left UCR, obtained a PhD, and has a faculty position teaching now. But it was that moment of the trust is such a difficult thing to put your finger on, but it's such an important thing to develop as part of your persona if you want to be an effective ally.
Very well said. Patty?
I actually wanted to add to that too. It's also the trust, but also willing to reevaluate the habits and norms that everyone expects, that may lead to marginalization. So that is really key, essential. But thank you for sharing that story. That was really nice.
Pablo's reaching for the mic. Go for it.
Yeah, actually, so I was going to say, sometimes the issue is with trying to identify people. First of all, don't be afraid to ask around, and it starts with trust. So you develop your little network that you feel comfortable. You ask lots of questions, and they often will lead you to somebody else who will have another piece of the pie, and it won't all be clear to you. But don't be afraid to ask around. And one of the most important things, particularly when it comes to academic medicine, and I knew that this is still true today. When you're a medical student, when you're a resident, you don't know the full breadth of what academic medicine means, right? What do you mean? I mean, we don't. We barely talk to, I mean, it'd be interesting or sometimes scary for a medical student to hear just how, clinical excellence and excellence in research and excellence in education and excellence, are you really doing all these things? And how do you balance life at the same time? And, things that are put on your plate. But how does that all work? And there are variations from institution to institution, but generally speaking, there is some, but nobody lays out the lay of the land. And when you're at the other end of the tunnel, you have your ideas about things that you may want to do, but you don't know how it all fits in because you're traveling down one lane. And if you meet that mentor who can sort of show you the broad scope, or even coming to sessions like this, where somebody is actually painting the wide range, so you say, you know what, my lane seems to be education. It's actually funny. My friends in medical school can't believe that I'm an education dean because I just wanted to get in and out and start seeing patients. But hey, that's where it goes. So, but I didn't know that. I did not know that. And nowadays, I have medical students asking early about, I do want to be a physician, but I want to be an educator someday. And you know what? Maybe I'll take a year off and get my master's early. That wasn't heard of before, because it wasn't a thing. It was just like, we're just trying to get through school. So you want to have that so you can have the bigger picture so that you know who to go around asking. But it's really important. And again, the mentors are not all going to be in one spot. I've had different people for different reasons. This is actually a truth. You're never going to find everything in one person. So for myself, I found a great mentor, and it was intentional, and it was at my society meetings. So go to those networking things are not a waste of time. Meet people, talk with people. I am a total introvert, but I did it, and I found my mentor. He was a chair of family medicine in San Antonio, Texas. I lived nowhere near there ever, but I wanted to know how it is to be a Latino leadership in medicine. And I would call him periodically. I didn't like call him constantly, but every once in a while, where there was some struggle that I was trying to figure out how to get through, or I'm having a particular issue, what is the best way to maneuver through that? They didn't need to know all the details of where I'm working. They just needed to tell me, how do I get through that? That was that one person for that one need. But then I have somebody else for a different need. My mentor for medical education was amazing. That was a sponsor and a mentor. When I was at Columbia, they took an interest, and they were the ones who put me forth and told the dean, you need to send this guy to Harvard Macy, because he's got some good ideas, but he needs to learn the method to the madness that is education. And that was the career-altering thing for me. I never forgot that, and that's what I try to do for other people. So I've done that. I've actually done that here. I will share a real story, because we're supposed to share some real stories. I had a junior faculty member here at UCR who wanted to sit with me to talk about ELAM. Raise your hand if you know what ELAM is. All right, so we need to talk about ELAM because this session is about leadership in women. So maybe later you can talk to people about those, because it's important. It's if I have the acronym right, Executive Leadership in Academic Medicine, the acronym would never tell you what that has to do with women, but it is. It's actually a premier program to advance women into positions of leadership across the spectrum of academic medicine. It is incredibly prestigious. I'm not going to talk about it because I didn't do it. I wish there was one for Latinos and African Americans, because it is of another caliber. But the women who come out are the movers and the shakers in academic medicine. And I had a junior faculty member who said, I'm interested in the ELAM program, but I want to know if it's okay, when is the right time for me to apply? So we were looking through the criteria, and the session was all about how to put yourself in the right place to be able to acquire all the things that are on the criteria in order to do that. And they kind of realized, okay, let's develop like a 2-year plan, 3-year plan, because I have other things that I need to attend to, but I will grow until I can get that. But I did leave them with the message that they need to find a sponsor, like for sponsorship, because I don't know all the details about the ELAM program, but I believe it requires sponsorship from a past ELAM member. At least it did before. So I said, you definitely need to make a beeline. I know it sounds like it's a long time away before you acquire these things, but meet with these ELAM folks, because they will think about you to sponsor you in order to get you into that program. So, and that's what they want. So this is that taking that experience and turning it into intentionality for someone else. So.
Nicely said there. One thing I also want to say when we say is how important it is to name our allies and to discuss what that is, even if to help us recognize what allyship should be and what we need to ask of it. First and foremost, I want to thank all of you here. By being here, you are allies. You're making space for this. You're saying how important this is. It's also important that this is not just women saying this is important. We have men, we have women, we have non-binary, we have all sorts of folks here who are saying this is very important, okay, in many groups. So with that, one of the things that we've been hearing from folks that I've been listening to, and they're telling me some very specific stories. They're telling us all very specific stories, and they're beautiful. But one of the questions that has been raised about this is allyship a one-on-one kind of thing? Or can you have allyship that really is going to benefit the entire workplace? So as when you're thinking about allyship and what you need to do to be an effective ally, is it really just directed at just me and Patty, me and Carlos? Or are there ways, and are there needs, and are there responsibilities for us to do this at a larger level? Who would like to sort of lead on this one? I can start. I'll start with Carlos there, because I know he's thought about some of these things.
Well, that's an interesting question, Monica, because something Pablo just said. When you talked about the, what is it, ELAM? Is that the, yeah. And you said the word, help them get a sponsor, because in order to qualify, you got to have a sponsor take you in. So I'm saying to this with Monica's question, I'm saying, there's an example of an artificial obstacle that, pardon my language, that screws some people. That in fact, the people who are networked to have sponsors automatically get privilege over those who don't. And so I would say this, and to Monica's question, that a good ally is not someone who simply works one-to-one, but the one-on-one is very important, but is willing to look for, be skeptical about systems, look for obstacles, and call them out. And I think that what you just said is an example of things built into systems, not just the medical system, but in almost every system you see, that if we just concentrate on the one-on-one individual, we'll miss out on some of those structural things that really do restrict categories of people. And in this case, we're talking about women, but with my mutt friend here, and I too am a mutt, that actually restricts categories of people from having the same opportunities as others. And calling out those things, I think, is a critical part of allyship.
Nicely said. I think that's a very important aspect of these kind of things. Things that give access, how we bin people, how we say who gets access, women, men, trans, binary, non-binary. How do you define? We see a lot of things about this, about who gets to go into these programs. So Patty, I saw you nodding a lot. Did you have any thoughts about that as well from, your...
I did. It's kind of, when I was looking at allyship, I was, I always like to look up the word. I always look at definitions, and it kind of is interchangeable to advocacy as well. Just there's many elements that, apply to allyship, especially because you always think the one-on-one interaction, is it personable to somebody or a selective group? But when I was reflecting back, I was thinking about my experience when I was at the dental school. We had our 3rd and 4th year students pair up for individual groups. So it was kind of like a mentorship, but I was the coordinator for one of the groups. So even though it was a one-on-one interaction, there was some times of a little bit of bickering with one another, disagreements, but I became the moderator. And we were all formulated in one group, and it was kind of the collaboration that was essential. that we became allies because we're like, wait a minute, what is the main focus here? Let's recap. I know we're having a bad day. So it's really kind of the communication piece, and then just, you know, we us humans have so much in common than in difference. So I kind of had to remind that to the students, but it was really something more collaborative. But it does interchange with advocacy, where it could be, you know, participating in volunteering and protesting, or even posting in social media platforms. So.
Yeah, these are important points. So, Zigzada, you're coming up, you're a student, you're seeing these things, you hear this about getting access to a program, not getting access to the program. What's your thoughts about the balance in that, especially in terms of allyship?
That's a really good question. I would say, that's a really good question. I would say that as far as kind of like Dr. Ju mentioned, having different resources that kind of push people more so into getting accepted into different programs based just on who you know. I would say medicine kind of is, I would say, a field of, in a lot of ways, of do you know somebody that also kind of like helped you to get into a lot of programs. And I think allyship, in comparison to that, just having those that are going to advocate for you for kind of getting into these very prestigious programs is important. But I do think that allyship to specifically, let's say, one person kind of limits it for a lot of other people. So advocating for having more diverse, I would say, applicants, as well as students, as well as faculty, as well as staff, I think is really important when being an ally, let's say specifically to one person, kind of thinking, yes, I do want to help this person, but also I want to make sure this continues to be a thing for multiple people. And yeah, that's kind of what I'm taking as far as like a student, and something that I'm hoping to be for someone in the future.
That's nicely said. Pablo, you just picked up that you want to say something very clearly.
Yeah, so the other thing about advocacy and allyship is it doesn't always have to happen this way, but sometimes you just got to have guts. You have to actually push against the system. Um, and and just because sometimes you can't, right? You're in a position where you're just, the hierarchy is the hierarchy, and you don't have the power necessarily to do that. But you can do that in small ways, just like by getting your cause known, again, finding the right people to listen. I mean, but you've always had to have the guts to do that. I was in my at the time it was called the Dean of Minority Affairs back in the 90s. I was in the office constantly because of the things that I was hearing, the degree of homophobia, the degree of anti-Mexican comments that were being taught as fact in medical school. It was just like, so that's the part that was just not okay with me. And I didn't care that I was a first year of medical school. I'm like, student, I mean, how is this okay? How is this ever okay? So, and I was disempowered, but I did it. But is that always smart? No, you learn later on how to be politically astute, because you don't always necessarily want to be screaming at people all the time. That turns people, they just stop listening, and you don't want that. You have to advocate in ways that actually, you always want to role model the same professional that you're expecting back, so that people always have your attention. But to these days, the kinds of advocacy are definitely not just one-on-one relationships. There also are structural on many ways. You're fighting to get resources to produce this diverse workforce that we're talking about, right? It's not, if you can find grants that will support, for example, the Prime program, for that community, that's what you do. You get that, so that we mean what we actually say. And that's what's great about UCR is a lot of that structural thing that keeps only certain people in medicine is actually completely blurred. And we're doing great. We're number 12 in student diversity, but we have a lot more work to do, right? That's amazing. But I try to do that every day. I mean, here we just started a new, what's called a assessment subcommittee of the Medical Education Council. And what that committee does sounds like a very sort of routine thing. We take a look at whether the tools that we use to measure different competencies in students are actually valid, reliable, good. Just looking at statistics, are they matched correctly to the competencies that we say that we're saying? But we're not stopping there. We're actually, it's not just about crunching numbers and calling it a day. We're also trying to see, what about those other things? Advocacy. What does that look like? How do you measure that? Professionalism. What does that actually look like? And what's also incredible too is we talk about implicit bias, like the possibility of misusing the tool to say something that isn't really happening, or can we look to see? I mean, these are from actual studies external to UCR, like men of color are given lower scores on OSCEs by standardized patients, and that there's implicit bias about how they speak or how they do must mean something, so I will downgrade them. So you've got to do a lot of training. So there's other things that are coming out of this committee besides that, and one of the things that I've insisted on is that we need to have members, 1 or 2 members of the Inland Empire, I'm talking about patients or community members on that, because that assessment is supposed to hopefully get us the outcomes that we're looking for. If this is our mission, then it should reflect the members of the community. Because if not, it's just an echo chamber. It's us, the doctors, talking to each other about what we think the doctors should do, but did anybody ask the patients, what are we looking for? So it's important. So there's other ways to do that, that advocacy and allyship change. So.
I'm going to ask one question to Paul, and then as more of a general, and then I'm going to come back to something very specific about women and science and medicine, some questions. But still as a generic, or not generic, a more general question about jumping off on these structural things. So Paul, you're in compliance. I'm going directly to your home. How much about how people use compliance is used maybe with good intentions, but is a problem, and what's the role of allyship there in navigating those spaces that impact the whole workplace or individuals?
I don't know if we have enough time.
I know, so you get, I gave you at least a little bit of time.
Yeah, so my joke is that compliance can be used as a shield or as a sword, and so that's the thing with compliance. It's a kind of a tough field from that perspective, because in my role I have to try to stay as objective as possible, and I've learned over the years to kind of reserve judgment. I don't make judgments until the end of a process, right? We don't start with a conclusion. We start with facts and gathering facts and researching rules and understanding everyone's various position and what happens. So there's like investigations that happen. So in the compliance world, we have to try to maintain that objectivity as much as possible. So, if I feel that someone is bringing a complaint, and I take it at face value. So I never start with a judgment and say, oh, they're lying or they're exaggerating. I take it at face value, and the facts will lead where they lead. So it may be the conclusion that there was some non-compliance with the policy or some type of wrongdoing that needs to be remediated. That happens in all organizations. Or it may be the conclusion that there is not. So, the facts will lead where they lead, but there is accountability. If someone misuses the process and files a concern that's not bona fide and based on, if they have a bona fide concern and it ends up being untrue, that's the valid concern that they're expressing. We want a culture where everybody feels comfortable coming forward and raising concerns. So that is very important to us. Non-retaliation is very important to us. We want to actively know that people will not be retaliated against for raising a concern, because everybody's voice is important and everybody's experience is important. So, part of the role of the compliance is to make sure that we are living up to those standards and those values. And I'll just say that earlier in my career, I personally have been retaliated against. So I know what it's like to be on that side of the coin. So to me, I take this very seriously because I understand what it's like to be on that side. So when I tell someone, you can trust me, that you can divulge confidential information to me, and within legal limits, it will go no further. I am a confidential source for you to tell me issues and concerns. They can take that to the bank. But like I was saying earlier, that trust doesn't come easily. It's built over time, and the organization has to support it. So fortunately, we are an organization under Dr. D's leadership where compliance is very important. We have fully supported the compliance function, and it started out as myself as a one-person department 7.5 years ago. We now have 6 individuals supporting the department, doing a range of function from auditing and monitoring, documentation audits, privacy audits. I can go on and on. But what was the original question?
So in one sentence, but in a couple sentences, basically, what is the role of the ally? Or what is the need for an ally to do? So and I want to take us to start going to actually practicalities. So I know we need people to speak up. We need people to do good things. But especially because compliance can be used as a sword. It could be used aggressively for
Yes.
people as an excuse to just marginalize folks. What is the actual role of an ally? How would you define, like if you wrote a job ad for an ally, to prevent this being inappropriately done, to enforce marginalization, or to keep voices from heard? What should the ally be doing?
I think the ally has to be an advocate for the truth. The ally has to be, like I said earlier, trusted with information, being able to handle it appropriately, being able to exercise diligence in a non-judgmental way. An ally has to be someone who will be able to identify where there are injustices happening and put a stop to it and make sure that the organization will not tolerate that. The tone from the top is very important, and making sure that those standards are going to be applied equally across the board, so there's not favoritism. You'll lose trust when things like that happen. And that an ally is going to be honest with someone and call them out if they're not behaving properly.
Nicely said. So one of the things is I'd like to go through, and I'm going to start with Patty, so I'm going to talk long enough for you to form your thoughts. People know this about me. I'll take a long-winded question. I'm good at being long-winded. Declan's looking at me very directly at this moment. But as we go through this, is that, again, getting to specificity of really action. We've talked about some important principles. We need people to have guts. We need people to see things. We need to make space so things can be heard. But I just heard this whole rendition of this job ad for this ally. That sounds like a big job, more than one person. So let's go through also and just go through the panel really quickly and say our top 3 things that they see, either because as a receiver of what they need for allyship for women, or as something as male that they see that women need, that they suggest, not that they can identify all needs, but a role for allyship. What are some very specific, things that we're looking at? And that can be phrased very locally to experiences you've had here, elsewhere. But we're thinking about women in medicine and science. And that's women whether you're a student, a trainee, a staff member, an intern, full faculty, dean of medicine. What do you think? And I'll start with you, Patty.
Well, I have a lot of stories, but one, I always think back to the former executive director whom I worked with at a neighboring medical school. She was the only female executive director at the time. She literally fully empowered me to do my job. I just came out of college and I was kind of green, fresh. So this was at the time where all leadership were all males, but she would include me. She would really include me in every meeting, even though at that time I thought I was out of my scope. She consistently asked for my feedback, suggestions. She even kind of moved me to kind of be innovative at work. Like, go ahead. Like Dr. Ho says, it takes guts. What are you going to lose? They're going to say no. So that was really something to take a chance. What I really think really applies for allyship. Also, in my current role, I connect with many female physicians within the Inland Empire, and they are so astonished to have and to learn that our medical school is so diverse. They feel that this program where I coordinate LACE is really essential, where they wish this existed when they were in medical school, because they share with me their experiences, their challenges, their struggles, but they want to be part of that change. So with that saying, with the experiences, is kind of giving back and to educate our community and to step outside the norm and it just takes guts, pretty much.
Okay, good. Carlos, we're just going to go right down the line.
Okay, well, I'll do this with a story too, because as I read biographies of women, I read some, obviously Marie Curie and Dr. Bernadine Healy and the big shots. But then I ran across the story of Dr. Frances Kelsey, and I want to share two things about her. She was Frances Kelsey, Canadian, applied to University of Chicago, received a letter of admission to Mr. Kelsey, Mr. Francis Kelsey. She had to make a decision. Do I write them back and say, hey, by the way, I'm a woman? Or do you just show up? She went and just showed up. And the men who at the University of Chicago admitted her anyway. And I say anyway because they had written that letter. Okay, so there was flexibility there. She then went on and get to the federal government. And she was at a low scientific position within the federal government when data for a drug in the late 1950s came across her desk, and she wasn't happy with it. She was not happy with the results. And she slowed things down. The paper, she had guts. She slowed things down, stalled off the paperwork, given time for more data to come in. The drug was approved in other countries. It was for the morning after sickness. It was called thalidomide. And American women who could not get the drug in the United States went overseas and got the drug, and their babies had major birth defects. Let's leave it at that. But it was her guts to be willing to break the rules and get in the way of things and put grist in the machinery, which changed the lives of many American women. In the story I read about her, there was not one mention of allyship. And it raised a question for me is, did she have some allies? Were they men or women? Did she talk to people? And it raises one final question, which is dangerous, but I got to posit it. Did she spot that because she was a woman? And I don't want to say because in a deterministic way, because that's stereotyping, but did that preclude her to look at the evidence through a different framework than most men would have looked at? If so, then I think we have to entertain the concept of a woman's way of knowing. Not just a woman's way of thinking or being, as Carol Gilligan has written about, but are there some things to being a woman which predisposes you to be able to see things differently, which benefit an entire organization and entire human beings, without at the same time stereotyping women as thinking like women? That's a terribly dangerous balance, but I think if it's something we avoid, we lose. So I'm gonna leave it at that.
Nice. Next.
So these are things that you think that we should be suggesting are steps that women can take? Is that exactly?
Well, no, I think you're asking what do you think is the need for allies specifically for women in science and medicine? Very pragmatically, what are the needs?
Exactly. So I think I've said some of this before already, which was intentionality, right? Like you don't have to be 57 years old for me to finally go, oh, I can be intentional. I wish I'd known all this stuff earlier. So seek those folks, build your network, and do that. And the other thing too is you may not always get it right. Sometimes you talk to people and it turns out that's not the venue you want. Actually, those are not waste of time. There's no such thing, actually, right? You go down a path, you meet with a certain group of folks and you realize that maybe that's not for me, that's not what I thought it was gonna be. And that's okay, because that's helping you figure out your path forward. So there's no downtime. So being intentional is one thing. The second thing, this is just a general thing, it's not specific to women, is walk the walk and talk the talk yourself, right? You can always be a mentor. There's always somebody, if you want a mentorship and you want to know what that looks like, also do the same like to others at all levels, right? And that includes being aware, like, I mean, I'm a mutt, but that doesn't mean that I've suddenly got to pass on implicit bias. I have it like everybody else, right? So again, just being aware of those things, and that you can never walk in everybody's shoes, no matter what even if you can, be comrades about certain things. Hey, you're Chilean also, and we know what foods we eat, but you're never going to walk everybody's individual pathway. And that's actually true. And take that when you're mentoring or in the other direction, you're asking for that. You realize you find the people who speak to you and give you what, like in terms of the things that you're asking for, but also be aware of the fact that that's an N of one, right? And they'll lead you to other people as well. And I think that that's probably what I would say, like in terms of the safe thing. And also what I said before is attend sessions that give you sort of the broad spectrum of academic medicine, because it is very, very broad, and there may be other things that are out there that you don't even know. And even if it's nothing that you're gonna, I'll give one more example. At one point, somebody offered me the possibility of being a medical director for a clinic, and it was the best decision that I ever made to say no. Not because there's anything wrong with that. That's actually fantastic for some people who want leadership in clinic. That's a step up in terms of what people want to do that. But that path was not for me. I wanted to take care of patients. That's not why I didn't do that. It's just that my passion was more in education and leadership in education, and not so much on management of clinical care and things like that. So, and that's fine. So again, the power of no is also important.
Okay, for mine, I said that the three most important things I think would be inclusivity, diversity, and an open mind. For inclusivity, I think women need to be included in more conversations. I also think that they need to be in more leadership positions, and just having the privilege to really have a voice, and having the voice actually matter and be heard. And then after their voice is heard, seeing an actual change based off of the things that they've mentioned. I also would say diversity. I think having mentors that are very diverse helps your own, I would say, view of the world, as well as how to deal with patients eventually, which is the thing we'll go into. But I think also having diversity as far as, I would say, gender, race, and even different occupations within medicine, I think is important to kind of see different aspects of how different physicians view the world, how different patients view the world, and just kind of how that can create a better physician in yourself, of just diverse experiences and having kind of just a diverse way and different way to like look at things and further make a diagnosis eventually for a patient, and just kind of being more inclusive of how their different life experiences can influence a lot of the different diseases or things that they're dealing with. And I think having good mentors that have dealt with different patients or have different life stories can definitely help you to, be the physician that is an advocate or ally to your patients. And then lastly, keeping an open mind. I think that's important just in all aspects of life. Making people feel safe, feel like they can be themselves and not in a place of judgment and kind of belittlement, I think is very important in an ally or being an ally for somebody else. And yeah.
Okay, so for my three, I said first and foremost to be an active listener, to really listen to what other people have to say, what they're all about, what's important to them, what they're doing, really understand where they're coming from. And then secondly, I said to support them by recognizing the work that they've done and recognize accomplishments that they've had, even if it's small things. Really give positive feedback and reinforcement and even, constructive criticism where necessary, but really that interaction and that acknowledgement, I think, is very important to people on a human level. And more actively, number 3, I said to actively seek to connect others with opportunities. So if it's, whether it's through an internship, whether it's a job promotion, whether it's some type of professional development opportunity, if you really want to help people, you can help try to advance them in the ways that are important to them, and ask them, how do you want to develop yourself? What's next for you in the future? How can I help you get there? And really have those discussions and work on planning that with people. I think that will engender a lot of respect, and also will help to advance the organization overall.
Thank you. That's very nice. So I'm going to open this up for questions, but I'm going to just, so I'm going to give you guys a couple seconds or a minute here to think of questions. And I'm just going to also share some things that I was curious if would come out in our panel here. And these are things that these individuals, these men and women here, told me about as some of the practical ways they did all these important things, connected inclusion and all of that. And some things I've also heard from walking around this room. And so, again, I'm giving you guys time to think of questions. But one of the things that people really have noted is, as you said, is noticing, making space, calling out in a meeting, at a dinner, at a lunch, at questions after class, noticing, yes, I really like that. Oh, you stayed on time, unlike everybody else. All sorts of things that you just saying these things is so important for the person receiving it, and women need to hear that more, so you can't overdo that. So more is more, more is better. Second thing that people brought up is the importance to amplify. So often women are over, and other marginalized as well, but the focus here is on women, are overspoken, literally overtalked, or they very politely listen, but they didn't hear, they didn't really listen to what it is. Sometimes you need to go and say, I want to build on what Patty said. Patty, could you say that again, because I think I missed it? Or I just want to say, it's like, I really like what Patty said about all of this, and then build on it, amplify it. So that's another practicality. It's also important, sometimes you have to start building active networks, and you need to actually, I know this sounds like Mitt Romney, binders of women, but you do need to have lists of folks that you start being aware of that have these experiences that you might think about might be good of this. So you have it on ready to suggest. And so that's what some of folks here have shared with me. And the last thing that people shared with me is also their experiences of recognizing people's authority. And that's not just recognizing Dee's authority, because she's at the top of the food chain here, but it's the authority of everybody, the students in the room, the authority to say things, that we have to recognize the women's authority and all marginalized. So with that, I think so far what's happened, these have been really good, but now I want to go to here. Who has questions that they'd like to ask? Just raise your hand and I will run to you with this microphone. And if you feel like it, say your name and just ask.
Hi, I'm Romina. I just want to thank everyone for taking the time to speak. I had a question for Zigzada, actually. I understand from, like the first month of medical school, you guys have like early clinical exposure through LACE. And I guess my question is, like, from your experience in clinic, being a female student doctor, a woman of color, what are some sort of challenges you've faced, and what has allyship or mentorship sort of looked like from the UCR community?
Thank you for that question. I would say my actual preceptor is also a woman of color. So I think we've had actually a lot of discussions about kind of just our place in medicine and how medicine is not as welcoming as it should be, I think, for women, and especially being a woman of color. But I think kind of having her as my preceptor has made me feel more comfortable essentially working to be a physician. And I think her kind of pushing me to, do patient visits by myself, or kind of coming in and correcting me when I should have been better in certain interview aspects, I would feel sorry, certain interview aspects kind of during patient visits, I think has really made me feel comfortable in, I would say, myself as a future physician, but also the ability to be corrected when I need to be corrected. I think UCR has done a good job in making me feel like this is a safe space for me to kind of grow as a physician, but like even more so as a human being. And so I really have loved UCR for that. I would say previously to this, if you're asking about that, I also have had very diverse experiences kind of in the clinical setting, but I think UCR has kind of created this space for me to feel safe with somebody else as my ally to kind of grow as a physician.
A question back there? Oh, no, you were just stretching. Okay.
Hello, I'm Maya. Thank you all for being here. I just wanted to ask, as women are moving into this new feminist wave of being more racially and gender inclusive, we're moving into this wave and we're very understanding, I would say, socially. But how would you suggest to any of the panelists, how would you suggest that we bring the rest of the world onto this movement? Because past feminist waves are already denied and combated. So as we move forward, how do we try to pick up the pace of everyone else?
Anybody want to jump in there? Why don't I, so Paul is waving it.
I'll take a stab at it. I think, I serve, along with Monica, we serve on the DEI committee for the School of Medicine. And that is a question that I think is very paramount to us right now, because we want to be able to always advance our culture and to one of openness and inclusion. But at the same time, we have to strike a balance so that people are willing to do it and that it's not forced. So for people with different comfort levels, a diversity is going to have a diversity, people with a diversity of opinions. They won't always agree with the types of social things that I might advocate for. So it's not an easy answer, but I think a lot of it is we have to be very thoughtful about the types of programs that we do. We have to introduce them, over time and interweave this into our culture, into the way that the school is. It's not just like something we're doing and say, here's we're throwing the things, new requirements on everyone. It's not about that. It's about building structures that are going to support diversity, equity, and inclusion through very thoughtful ways. Where people really feel a sense of belonging and where it's not a forced thing. So I don't know, Monica, if that...
Well, he's about that answers your question. I think Carlos would like to say something.
Patricia's pushing me, so so I agree. Thank you. As I mentioned, I along with Adjo Jose, started the Health Equity, Social Justice, and Anti-Racism thread. And we decided to go slowly, probably too slowly for the minds of some. We spent an entire year simply studying what other medical schools had done and holding conversations with faculty, with students, and with community. We had a whole year of community conversations to try to find out how they saw the issues of health equity and the experiences they had. Last year, we did our first set of modules for first and second year students and for fourth year students, not third year students. And we had a team of student ambassadors who are our allies, mainly women, by the way, female students, who we met with regularly to critique what we were doing in our modules. And we've revised that, I think, for the better for this year. So we're going slowly because what we want to do is do something that A, is effective, not showy, but effective, B, sustainable. And I have to admit, some of the things we saw in other medical schools, and this is not a critique, other larger, more resourced medical schools, we couldn't do. And so we had to be able to dial back and say, what we want to do, we want to do effectively, not for show, and certainly not to be on a checklist.
I'll just give one example with our policies and procedures. So, the School of Medicine has, I don't know, hundreds of policies and procedures, and they used to be, from the old policy writing style, everything was the default gender was he. If an employee needs to fill out a form, then he needs to do X, Y, Z. We 5 years ago, 6 years ago, we changed it to be he/she. So, if the employee wants to do this, he/she should do so-and-so. We have now evolved further, and we've now used the word they. We are gender neutral. So we have thoughtfully, over the last few years, been converting language in our documents to be gender neutral. So if the employee needs to do this, then they will do X. So that's just a small example to show that, how over time we are trying to be more inclusive and operationalize that in ways that are sensible and are going to be sustainable. So.
Okay, I have a question back here from Rosemary.
Hi. I just was interested from the women on the panel and the women in the audience, if they would share one example of a time when they felt they needed an ally and what did they need from that ally that they weren't getting. So I think being able to put it into a picture, into a scenario is helpful for people to understand. What are women looking for when they're asking for allyship? So for anyone, any of the women on the panel or any of the women in the audience.
So if anybody wants to start with that, I can start. When I was pregnant and I was a graduate student, it was a planned pregnancy, and I told the graduate program, and they said, so when are you leaving? And what are you going to do next? And I was like, was this an accident? Where are you leaving? And what are you going to do next? And it was like, no, this is planned. I was going to do my PhD, and I haven't yet thought of what I'm going to do after that. I would have liked somebody to spoke up. I do say what I was surprised about was that the most misogynistic person in the graduate faculty was the one who finally spoke up on my behalf. So you never know where allies will come. Anybody else? Patty or Zigzada, would you like to say anything?
I would say for me specifically, I think it would just be kind of more advocacy. I would say I haven't necessarily been in a place of power within the educational institutions that I've been within. So kind of just having someone to be an ally, but an ally that advocates for me in different situations, I think is something that is really important. And I feel like it makes at least me feel more supported. And I think women should feel supported.
Actually, I pretty much have encountered a lot with many individuals, but they've actually been supportive bringing back the pregnancy. I was working full time. Luckily, I was with faculty and doctors, so they were in the same boat with me, some of them, and they were great advocates for me and allies. They understood. It wasn't like, oh, Patty's being emotional. No, she just is tired because her feet are swollen and she's going to be, expecting to deliver it next week. So, I mean, it was really more supportive as far as having somebody provide some sort of advocacy. A lot of the times I felt encountering is that I have faced certain women actually be more competitive towards one another rather than collaborating. That I've actually had faced before. And instead of helping one another, we tend to be critical. We tend to be like, oh, I didn't do that when I had my children or when I worked. So I think we got to take a step back because we don't know each other's backgrounds. We don't know what environment we're from. And so just showing respect from different levels is really key.
And that's something I'd say that has been a recurrent feature. Sometimes when you're in a marginalized situation or things, sometimes your competition is from those who've actually feel they're competing in that space. or don't know like what they have to emulate to go on in the thing, and it can be inadvertent. So I think that's also something to think about. What should women do for other women in these spaces? And so I don't know if anybody wants to comment on that, and I will actually, I mean, I don't know if other, Zigzada or Patty, you feel like saying anything about that, or I'm going to do something that I like to do. I'm going to pick on our dean. What would she like to say about this?
Well, I'm not going to say what, was it Madeleine Albright said? Because she got in trouble for that. Do you get that? But I will say that women really should be supportive of other women, period. And I think back about my mother, who, as I was growing up, and all the little, squabbles that you have growing up, she would always say, no, you should support each other. And when I was older and old enough to really understand what she meant, she then reminded me that when you get in certain spaces, you should lift as you climb and always bring others along. So that's sort of been my modus operandus over my career, is trying to bring others along, but not just women. I try to do that for men as well.
And I think there could be no better way for us to close this portion and also now open the reception. I want to thank everybody here on this panel. I want to thank everybody here. And I do thank everybody for sharing their thoughts, the vulnerabilities of everything you're putting out there. I really thank everybody here for participating and being together. And I'm going to turn this over to Rosemary for her to transition us to what's next.
Next thing. Please join me in thanking the panel and Dr. Carson. Thank you.